The MG42 did not sound like a machine gun. It sounded like fabric being ripped apart. Allied soldiers called it Hitler's Buzzsaw, and for good reason. At 1,200 rounds per minute, it fired so fast that individual shots blurred into a continuous roar. This is the story of the weapon that forced the Allies to completely rethink infantry tactics. Let's start with the design that changed everything. In 1942, Germany needed a machine gun that could be mass-produced quickly and cheaply. They took the MG34, an excellent but complex weapon, and completely reimagined it. The result was the Maschinengewehr 42. Instead of using expensive machining processes, German engineers employed stamped sheet metal and simplified mechanisms. The weapon could be produced in half the time of its predecessor and cost 30% less. But that wasn't the innovation that mattered on the battlefield. The real genius was the recoil-operated, roller-locked bolt system. This mechanism allowed the MG42 to achieve a cyclic rate of 1,200 rounds per minute. Some variants pushed closer to 1,500. To put that in perspective, the American Browning M1919 30 caliber fired around 400 to 600 rounds per minute. The British Bren gun managed about 500. The MG42 fired twice as fast as its Allied counterparts. When it opened up, enemies did not hear individual gunshots. They heard a continuous buzz, like an industrial saw cutting through metal. American GIS described it as sounding like tearing linoleum or ripping canvas. That sound became synonymous with terror. But the extreme rate of fire created an extreme problem: heat. When a crew was pushing 1,000 rounds downrange every minute, the barrel got white hot in seconds. Fire a sustained burst for more than 250 rounds, and the barrel would glow cherry red. Keep going, and it would warp, rendering the weapon useless. The German solution was brilliant in its simplicity. They made the barrel quick change. Here is how it worked in combat. The MG42 barrel was not screwed in or bolted down. It was held in place by a simple latch on the right side of the receiver. When the barrel got too hot, the gunner would flip that latch, swing open the receiver, and the spent barrel would slide right out. The assistant gunner, who carried spare barrels in an asbestos-lined case, would hand over a cool barrel. The gunner would slot it in, close the receiver, lock the latch, and the weapon was ready to fire again. The entire process took 5 to 7 seconds with a trained crew. Compare that to the Browning .30 caliber, which required significantly more time and tools to change barrels, and was rarely done in the heat of battle. German doctrine called for barrel changes every 250 rounds during sustained fire. But in the chaos of combat, crews often pushed that limit. Smart machine gun teams carried 3 or 4 spare barrels per gun. They numbered them with chalk to keep track of which barrels had been fired and which were cool. During intense firefights, you would see spent barrels lying on the ground steaming, while the gun kept firing with fresh ones. This ability to maintain continuous fire gave German infantry a massive tactical advantage. The MG42 was designed around a concept the Germans called Einheitsmaschinengewehr, the universal machine gun. One weapon, multiple roles. With a bipod and a 50-round drum or belt, it served as a light machine gun for offensive infantry operations. Mounted on a sustained fire tripod with optical sights, and it became a heavy machine gun for defensive positions. Add an anti-aircraft mount, and it could engage low-flying aircraft. The Allies had to field multiple specialized weapons to do what the MG42 did alone. Let's talk about the ammunition. The MG42 fired the 7.9 2x57mm Mauser round, the same cartridge used in the German Kar 98K rifle. This logistical simplification meant infantry squads only had to carry one type of rifle ammunition. The round itself was powerful. At 2,500 feet per second muzzle velocity, it could penetrate cover that would stop lighter rounds. Combined with the MG42's rate of fire, this created an almost impenetrable wall of lead. The impact on tactics was revolutionary. The entire German infantry squad was built around the MG42. While American squads centered on the riflemen, with the BAR providing support, German squads existed to support the machine gun. The riflemen were there to protect the MG42 team, carry ammunition, and suppress threats. The machine gun dictated where the squad moved, where it set up, and how it fought. This was called the machine gun squad doctrine, and it proved devastatingly effective. When a German squad went into action, the MG42 team picked the best position, usually with overlapping fields of fire with other MG42 machine guns. The assistant gunner would set up the tripod or the bipod while the gunner prepared the ammunition belts. Once in position, the gun could control an entire sector. The high rate of fire meant that even if the gunner's aim was slightly off, the sheer volume of bullets compensated. Suppressive fire, the tactic of keeping enemy heads down through continuous fire, became the MG42 signature capability. Here is where the comparison with Allied weapons becomes stark. The Browning M1919, a .30 caliber machine gun, was an excellent, reliable weapon. It was accurate, durable, and it served from World War I through Korea and beyond. But its 400 to 600 rounds per minute rate of fire meant it could not achieve the same suppressive effect as the MG42. American machine gunners had to fire in shorter, more controlled bursts. They aimed at specific targets rather than saturating an area. This meant American squads had to rely more on individual riflemen, and they could not pin down enemy forces as effectively. The tactical difference showed up in combat reports from Normandy, Italy, and the Eastern Front. American infantry advancing against entrenched Germans frequently reported being pinned down by MG42 fire. The gun's high rate of fire created what soldiers called beaten zones, areas where the density of fire was so high that crossing them was suicidal. A single MG42 could lock down 100 meters of frontage. Multiple guns in interlocking positions could stop entire companies. The sound alone had a psychological impact. Veterans reported that the distinctive buzz made soldiers hesitate. When you heard an MG42 open up, you knew you were facing a weapon that could put more rounds in the air in 10 seconds than you could fire from your rifle in a minute. That hesitation, that split second of fear, gave German defenders precious time to adjust their fire, or to call in support. The barrel change system became critical during defensive battles. At places like Monte Cassino, Cannes, and the Hurtgen Forest, German machine gun crews would prepare multiple barrels before battle. When Allied forces attacked, the MG42s would lay down continuous fire, changing barrels every few minutes. This sustained rate of fire was something Allied planners struggled to counter. American and British forces learned to call in artillery, or air support, to suppress German machine gun nests before advancing, because small arms fire alone often could not overcome the volume of fire. Soviet forces on the Eastern Front faced the MG42 in massive numbers. Red Army tactics often relied on human wave attacks, where sheer numbers would overwhelm German positions. The MG42's rate of fire made these tactics incredibly costly. Soviet after-action reports noted that German machine guns could break up attacks before they gained momentum. The Red Army responded with their own high-capacity machine guns like the SG-43 and emphasized overwhelming firepower, but they never quite matched the MG42's combination of reliability, rate of fire, and quick-change barrel system. The MG42 wasn't perfect. Its extreme rate of fire meant it burned through ammunition at an alarming pace. A gunner could empty a 250-round belt in about 12 seconds of sustained fire. This created massive logistical challenges. German infantry companies had to dedicate men just to carry machine gun ammunition. Resupply became a constant concern, especially during retreats, or when supply lines were disrupted. The gun also required more maintenance than slower firing weapons. The high rate of fire meant more wear on parts, more fouling from powder residue, and more strain on the receiver. Smart crews cleaned their weapons obsessively and carried spare parts. But in the chaos of extended combat, maintenance sometimes fell by the wayside, leading to jams and failures at critical moments. Despite these drawbacks, the MG42 earned legendary status. Allied intelligence devoted entire reports to analyzing it. Captured examples were studied intensively. American ordnance officers marveled at the simplicity of the stamped metal construction and the quick change barrel. After the war, multiple nations adopted the basic design. The American M60 machine gun borrowed heavily from the MG42's belt feed mechanism. The modern German MG3, still in service today, is essentially an updated MG42 rechambered for 7.6 2x51mm NATO ammunition. Operating an MG42 effectively required teamwork. The gunner controlled the trigger and aimed the weapon, but the assistant gunner was equally critical. He fed ammunition belts, watched for targets the gunner missed, changed barrels, and protected the gun team's flanks. In defensive positions, a good crew could maintain fire almost indefinitely, with the assistant gunner swapping barrels every 3 to 4 minutes and feeding fresh belts continuously. Training emphasized speed and efficiency. German machine gun schools drilled crews on barrel changes until they could do it blindfolded. The goal was to minimize the window when the gun was out of action. 5-second barrel changes became standard. Elite crews could do it in 3 seconds. This muscle memory saved lives. When Allied forces advanced under artillery cover, every second the MG42 was silent gave them precious meters of ground. Fast barrel changes kept the gun in the fight. The doctrine of suppressive fire reached its peak with the MG42. Suppressive fire is not about killing every enemy soldier. It is about controlling their movement and denying them the ability to fight effectively. When an MG42 opened up on a position, soldiers could not raise their heads to shoot back. They could not maneuver. They could not call in support. They could only hunker down and wait for the firing to stop. This gave German forces the initiative to reposition, call in mortars, or counterattack. American infantry developed specific tactics to counter MG42s. Small unit actions emphasized flanking maneuvers. While one element drew fire and kept the MG42 crew focused, another element would move around the flank to attack from an angle the gun could not cover. Rifle grenades and mortars became critical for suppressing machine gun nests. Tank support was invaluable. The armor and firepower of a Sherman could silence an MG42 position that would pin down infantry for hours. The British took a different approach, emphasizing overwhelming artillery preparation. Before any major attack, British forces would saturate suspected machine gun positions with high explosives. The logic was simple. Dead machine gunners cannot fire their weapons. But German forces adapted by positioning MG42s in deep bunkers and reinforced positions that could survive all but direct hits. The cat-and-mouse game between attackers and defenders centered largely on these weapons. On the Eastern Front, the tactical picture was even more brutal. Soviet forces often lacked the artillery support available to Western allies, especially during the desperate fighting of 1941 and 1942. Red Army infantry faced MG42s with raw courage and horrific casualties. Soviet commanders developed rush tactics, where small groups would sprint from cover to cover, while others provided suppressing fire. It was bloody work. Soviet casualties from machine gun fire were staggering, but the sheer scale of the Red Army meant they could sustain losses that would cripple other nations. The impact on Allied morale cannot be overstated. Soldiers who had never faced an MG42 in combat had heard the stories. They had been warned about the buzzsaw sound. When they finally encountered it, the reality often matched the nightmare. Unit diaries and after-action reports from Normandy describe entire platoons pinned down by single MG42 positions. Officers noted that green troops sometimes froze when they heard that distinctive ripping sound, unable to move or return fire effectively. Veteran troops learned respect for the weapon. They understood that attacking an MG42 position head-on was suicide. They waited for support, called for tanks or artillery, and used smoke to obscure their movements. But even experienced soldiers described the sound of an MG42 as uniquely terrifying. It represented industrial-scale lethality, a machine designed to kill with maximum efficiency. Late in the war, as German production focused on quantity over quality, some MG42s were produced with cheaper materials and less finishing. These weapons were more prone to jamming and failures. But even a degraded MG42 was a formidable weapon. The basic design was so sound that it could tolerate significant quality reductions and still function. Captured examples showed crude welds, rough stampings, and minimal machining, yet they still fired. The legacy of the MG42 extends far beyond World War II. Post-war analysis by military theorists recognized that the German approach, building infantry tactics around a highly mobile, high-volume machine gun, was fundamentally sound. NATO forces adopted similar concepts. The American M60, despite its differences, followed the universal machine gun philosophy pioneered by the MG42. Modern infantry squads still center their tactics around the machine gun, a direct inheritance from German doctrine. Today, over 80 years after its introduction, the MG42's design lives on. The MG3, used by Germany and dozens of other nations, maintains the roller-locked bolt, the quick-change barrel, and the high rate of fire. It remains one of the most effective general-purpose machine guns in service. That longevity speaks to the brilliance of the original design. The MG42 changed how armies thought about suppressive fire, squad tactics, and the role of the machine gun in infantry combat. It forced Allied forces to adapt their tactics, their training, and their equipment. It demonstrated that a well-designed, mass-producible weapon could have strategic impact far beyond its technical specifications. The sound of tearing fabric that terrified Allied soldiers in 1944 echoed through military doctrine for generations. Hitler's buzzsaw cut deeper than just the soldiers who faced it. It cut through the assumptions about how infantry combat should be fought, leaving a legacy that shapes warfare to this day.